A shocking story appeared on the BBC News website yesterday. It was about one Naomi O'Brien of Thameside, who had been jailed for directing a Welsh man to abuse a 4-year-old child. Now, the headline reads, "Predatory woman who incited man to abuse child for jailed." What the article doesn't tell you is that Naomi O'Brien is a man. Throughout the article, he's referred to with she, her pronouns. You have to use the evidence of your own eyes to get the truth. And we've been here many times before. Look at this horrific article from the BBC in March 2022. Pensioner arrested after dismembered body found. The article begins with these lurid details. A pensioner has been arrested on suspicion of killing and dismembering a 68-year-old woman she met online. An adult female torso was found in a bag inside a shopping trolley near 83-year-old Harvey Marcelin's apartment in Brooklyn, New York. She has now been charged with second-degree murder and concealment of a human corpse. Marcelin had previously spent more than 50 years in prison for killing 2 female friends. Some of you might sense something is amiss here. There are very few female serial killers and even fewer who target other women. It just doesn't sound like a woman's crime, does it? And that's because it isn't. You have to read to the very bottom of this BBC article before the writer mentions that the killer had only, quote, recently identified as a woman. This detail is presented as an aside, as though it was an inconsequential aspect of the case, but it's fairly crucial. And the examples are endless. So according to journalists, this is a woman who was imprisoned for sexual assault. This is a woman who was arrested for making bomb threats. This is a woman who was jailed for stabbing and for false imprisonment. This is a woman who was jailed for paedophilic abuse. And this is a woman who exposed her penis and used a wheelie bin as a sex toy in public. So let's be truthful about this. All of these criminals are men. And that shouldn't surprise us. Men are far more likely to be criminals than women. There are currently 84,000 men in prison, as compared with just 3,500 women. And according to figures from the Ministry of Justice, 98% of those convicted of sex offences are male. And yet, if you believed the mainstream media, you'd think there'd been an exponential increase in the numbers of women committing sexual assaults. Well, you might say the media is just following the language used by the police. And they would have a point. Let's go back to this week's news that a man calling himself Naomi O'Brien has been convicted for inciting child abuse. So here's a statement from D.I. Marsden of the Greater Manchester Police's online child abuse investigation team. This is a significant result for what is a very vulnerable and innocent 4-year-old child who was subjected to multiple counts of abuse, but also for all the other children in the community who could have been subject to similar offending by a predatory female who was inciting others to commit acts of sexual harm against the most vulnerable in society. But there was no predatory female in this case, and the police know that. And nor is there any legal obligation for them to refer to O'Brien as a woman. That's a fact that not many people realise. Now, the guidance for the police is muddled at best, and practice is completely inconsistent across the country. A Freedom of Information request by the group Keep Prisons Single Sex found that of the 24 police forces who replied, 15 said they recorded suspects by gender identity, and just 2 record on the basis of biological sex. In other words, the police appear to be making it up as they go along. When a suspect identifies as non-binary, many police forces record that sex as indeterminate or non-specified, even though non-binary does not exist as a category in English law. As a result of all of this, crime statistics in the UK are being skewed. And there's a very simple solution to it all. Just record suspects and criminals by biological sex. And if you must, record gender identity if a particular criminal claims to have such a thing, but record that separately. Although why the metaphysical beliefs of criminals need to be recorded is beyond me. It's important that we have accurate crime statistics. At the moment, we have no way of knowing how many of these female rapists are actually men. And it's also important that we stop male criminals from using this religion of gender identity as a loophole to be moved to women's prisons. So let's take Adam Graham, the double rapist who thought that wearing a dodgy wig and calling himself Isla Bryson might get him housed in the female estate. And he was accommodated in a female prison while the Scottish Government was conducting a risk assessment. What risk assessment might one need? He's a double rapist. Still, at least he didn't get away with it. Unlike David Thompson, the rapist and paedophile, who called himself Karen White and was then transferred to a women's prison where he went on to sexually assault 2 female inmates. So what do we do about all of this? Well, it would seem that the UK police are ideologically captured, but perhaps the media could start telling the truth. After all, there is no legal obligation for journalists to lie about the sex of a criminal. Of course, if they're quoting from a court case and a criminal has been referred to with different pronouns, they are obliged to quote accurately. But most of these articles are about convicted criminals, so there's no justification for the inaccuracy. Many media outlets claim that they're simply following style guides, but none of these style guides are compulsory. After all, the Associated Press style guide in the US suggests that when referring to skin colour, the word black should be capitalised and the word white left in lowercase. But many, if not most, media outlets just ignore that because they recognise that it's ideologically driven and racially divisive. So why can't they do the same in the case of gender? Even IPSO, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, does not mandate that journalists should use the preferred pronouns of criminals. Now, the guidelines do ask journalists to consider whether they have used the pronouns that the individual uses to describe themselves, but it's absolutely not demanded. However, one of the things that IPSO does clearly say in its guidance is this: journalists should take care not to publish inaccurate and misleading information. Now, it's the same for televised journalism. Ofcom does not mandate using preferred pronouns of criminals, which is just as well, because I'd rather not be forced to lie to my viewers. So given that it is wholly voluntary for media outlets to do this, why do they keep on doing it? Even right-leaning newspapers are at it, so we can't really put this down to party politics. So to all those editors and journalists out there who are going along with this nonsense, I would ask you to please think again. This policy is embarrassing, it's unprofessional, and it's dangerous. You don't need to pretend that male sex offenders are women just because they say they are. You don't need to worry about the hurt feelings of rapists and paedophiles. Your job is to report the truth. So stop lying to the public.